Welcome back to the Training Babble podcast. I'm your host, Dave Schell, and today I am back with Uri Carlson from Inner Wild Nutrition. Uri, thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me again.
So I always love talking to you because not only are you a dietitian, but you also mountain bike. And so it's not just stuff that you learned in the classroom or stuff that like works in practice or, in theory, but it's like you test this in practice as a mountain biker, but you also live at high altitude. And today we're going to talk about the effects of heat and altitude on nutrition and training and all the things that we need to take into consideration when doing high altitude races.
Yeah, there's so much there.
Awesome. So we started this like when we first pitched the idea, we were going to do it just on Leadville because Leadville is such a unique beast. And I think we should start just by like defining like what is high altitude. And the way that I understand it, there's like below 4,000 feet is like low altitude. And then from like 4 to 8 is like moderate altitude. 8+ is high. And then once you get above like 10.5 or something, it becomes extreme or something. Mm-hmm. And so when we're talking about something like Leadville that's at 10,000 feet, or something like Breck Epic you live in Breckenridge, and I think you guys sit around, is it 8,000 or 9,000 feet?
It's like 9, let's see. Yeah, my watch right now in Breck is 9.5.
9.5. Okay. Yep. So that's also high. Right. So I never give it credit. I'm like, maybe because I'm in denial. But so we're talking about like Leadville, we're talking about Breck Epic. There's also some other mountain bike races that happen in Breckenridge. And so what are the differences when like versus racing at sea level or even at like 5,000 feet? Like once we get up above 8,000 feet, what are the differences in nutrition that we need to like take into account?
Yeah. One of the things that I see first off is, and I would see this, I used to work at the Whole Foods in Frisco and in the, like supplement department, right? And there would be so many people that would come through and be like, oh, I'm at altitude. I need all the water. I need all the water. I need all the water. And yes, you should be hydrated. You should make sure you're staying hydrated, but electrolytes become really important as well. It's not just about chugging gallons and gallons of water. It's about maintaining an electrolyte and fluid balance. And also this is specifically for athletes, right? There's a whole other thing with that. Sedentary people do not need to be consuming the same amount of electrolytes that athletes are consuming. And there's important and valuable noise about that right now that's happening where like, no, you should not be consuming Element if you were just sedentary, right? That's going on a whole different thing. But the hydration, fluid, and electrolyte balance is what more specifically what that means at altitude becomes really, really important. Also, recognizing that when you're coming up to train and to race at these high altitudes, your appetite can actually be suppressed. While at the same time, your body is working harder and burning more calories and more carbohydrates to maintain the same baseline that you have at a lower elevation. So it's this really difficult thing that happens if you're just paying attention to like how hungry you are, you have to kind of override that with we call it practical hunger, right? Like, well, practical hunger is telling me that I can't just pay attention to how I'm feeling. I need to pay attention to the logistics of the situation and what my needs are practically here. So your appetite can be suppressed. You may need more because your body's working harder. And that's something that can be really hard to manage for folks. You can't train at as high of a output, as high of an intensity up here because your body just doesn't have the oxygen available. But you can actually be burning more calories. So your carbohydrate goals on the bike can go up as well.
And so we were kind of talking about this before we started recording. And I think we've talked about this in previous podcast where it's like there's optimal. It's like we can get out our spreadsheet and we can be like, oh, I need to eat like 66.5 grams of carbs per hour or something like that. Yeah. But once we're on the bike and we're just grabbing like stuff out of our pockets and we just have bottles or we have a hydration pack and stuff like that, how do we account for that? Right? It's like if we've been practicing this nutrition or this fueling strategy, and like I'll use myself as an example, right? It's like I'm always like one package of Cliff Blocks and one bottle of scratch, 16 ounces per hour. And that puts me around 65 grams of carbs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I need to take on more than that, where do I get the extra carbs from? Or, am I like trying to eat 1.5 packs of Cliff Blocks, or am I adding some more sugar to my scratch? Like, what would you recommend there?
I'm working on this with all of my athletes. I think I've got 5 athletes right now that are training for the Breck Epic, and it's slightly different for each person, but that's a great place to start, Dave. With you said is like, let's not completely change the formula. If I'm at 65 grams of carbs per hour with my combination of the scratch and the gummies, how many more gummies do I need to add? How much more of a scoop of scratch do I need to add to get 10 extra grams of carbs per hour, for example? And that would be a really good start. And make sure you feel really good with that. I think one of the most important things for people that are starting to consider this of like, okay, I'm prepping to come up to altitude and to race or to ride. First of all, you have to know what your current baseline is that you do really well with.
Right. And we've talked about that in the previous one. Yeah.
Yeah. And then from there, okay, let's add 10 to 15 grams extra carbohydrate per hour. And let's make sure that logistically I can get it in with what I'm increasing the concentration of what I currently have or increasing the amount of gummies that I currently have to get. It's not going to be a ton. Honestly, 10 to 15 extra grams is not a ton. Can I do that? And is my gut going to tolerate it? Are my taste buds going to tolerate it? Am I going to be able to logistically consume this many more gummies? There's so many different combinations of ways you can get it in different fuel forms that you have to figure out what's going to be best for you and then go and test it to make sure that your gut tolerates it okay.
Well, and we've talked about this in the past too, where it's like things that work in training, like it works great. You can like stomach all the, I've ridden with the cheeseburger in my stomach before and been fine, right? And it's like all of a sudden you're in a race and it's a bit hotter. You're going a bit harder.
Yeah.
Like for me, it seems to be like the 5-hour mark. All of a sudden I start to get nauseous or I can't stand the thought of sugar anymore. And then it's just like Coke or whatever that I can get to. And so like what kind of contingency plans do you have with your athletes for that sort of thing?
For something like the Breck Epic and for Leadville, utilizing the drop bags for the Breck Epic with like any and all options, the contingency plan options, and for something like the aid stations at Leadville, that becomes so key because I never want to set up any one of my athletes with a plan A and no plan Bs and no plan Cs, because then you're just kind of like working with luck there, right?
Yeah.
So, it's those things of, first of all, you have to make the decision of, okay, if you know that you're going to hit that 5-hour mark and you're going out there for 7, 8, 9 hours, are you going to start with variety right off the bat so you don't hit that 5-hour mark and then have to do a completely different fueling strategy? You know what I mean? Like, okay, I've got the scratch in my bottle and the gummies, but I know that at the 5-hour mark, that's not going to work for me anymore. Or are you going to do, and then you're going to switch to something else? Or are you going to do a lower concentration of scratch, a lower concentration of the gummies, plus something else that can last you for 7, 8, 9 hours, right? Does that make sense? Like you're either switching over to something completely different at the 5-hour mark, or you're just making a different combination of things last longer potentially.
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel like mountain biking just adds another element to this, where it's like doing gravel racing, doing Unbound, for example. It's like I had my bento box and it's like I was doing Lara bars and I could have all this variety and you could I had my plan on how I was going to switch things. But like, I feel like when you're off road and at high altitude and you're not thinking clear, like I just feel like I get to a point where it's just like, whatever I can get in my I can get in my mouth, because you can't carry that much. You don't know it's going to be at aid stations and stuff like that. So what recommendations do you have for like, if it's hard to take your hands off the bars, you're only going to be able to eat maybe on the uphills and stuff like that. Like what kind of stuff do you recommend to your athletes for food?
I really like the little soft flasks. I'm trying to see if I have one right here. Something like this.
Yeah.
With some high carb in it.
Okay.
It doesn't matter what high carb it is. Like I'm having a lot of my Breck Epic people actually test out various high carb, like the feed high carb, the scratch super high carb, the tailwind high carb, to figure out what's going to be a good option for them. Because this can be a really nice addition on top of what you already know works for you. Like in your case, Dave, it would be the scratch plus the gummies. And then this might, just by adding this in, it will get you a little bit more. And it can be super quick, right? Like whether if you have a hydration vest, like you put it like super close to you.
Right.
So you don't have to move a ton. Or you're putting it in a really accessible pocket, or you have it in a drop bag so that if you need it, you can grab it and it's already mixed and it's good to go. One of the interesting things that we're working on a lot right now is really, really getting strategic with the hour by hour strategy. Not new research. Like this has been a thing for a while now, but Tim Podlegar, who does tons of research in this space and is constantly working on new ways to look at fueling and new perspectives and stuff like that, has now like even more so confirmed that it doesn't necessarily matter. Let's say, for example, you have 60 grams of carbs per hour as a goal. It doesn't matter if you get that all in one dose of 60 grams or you get it in 3 doses of 20 grams, every 20 minutes throughout that hour, in terms of the energy that is going to give you and how that's going to impact your performance. So that's a really important thing to know, in that, okay, well, if I'm going to go do a super long descent down Columbine, for example, or down Wheeler, right, for the Miners Creek for the Breck Epic, I'm not taking my hands off the handlebars. This is not my time. So I'm going to fuel ahead of time so that I don't have to fuel for the next, whenever it is, 45 minutes. And so you can kind of like do this mini preload and get you through those periods of time where, based on the elevation profile, based on what you know about the course, you're setting yourself up with, all right, what I take in for this hour is going to be in different increments than what I take in for this hour.
Right.
However, the situation becomes is like, well, can my gut tolerate 60 grams of carbs in one bolus, or is my gut going to be happier with 20 grams of carbohydrates every 20 minutes? So that's the logistic that becomes really important and is very much an individual thing, right? And that's what I think is really important for people to practice, to start to recognize, like, ooh, like what can I tolerate? What is my body going to respond okay to?
So with that, like we've talked about that before, but like going back to this contingency plan, I think we had talked before we started recording too, is like getting up to altitude if you can, not necessarily because you think, like, not for the training adaptation or anything, but just to get familiar with like how your body might respond on that day. And so like when you're talking to people and you have these contingency plans, let's say they've like A, B, and C are not working, then where do you go? And I'll just use myself as an example. Like all of a sudden I'm just like stopping at every aid station and drinking as much Coke as possible because I feel like that's the only thing I can get down.
Mm-hmm. Then you're trying to get in anything that you can possibly get down, honestly. And you're probably just decreasing your intensity to try to keep moving. Yeah. It would depend on, like, why it's happening in the first place. I think what's really important for people to recognize is, like, start to have enough knowledge to be able to figure out, okay, if something is going wrong, why did it happen in the first place? And a lot of times that's the missing piece, because if we don't know why it happens, we don't necessarily know how to fix it. So I'm always telling my athletes, like, I don't want to tell you to just go out and do something without knowing why I'm telling you to go and do something. So I'm like, here's why we're going to focus on, a combination of liquid calories and solid calories. Here's why we're going to focus on a combination of, for you specifically, like liquid calories plus some chewable fuel plus some salty stuff, based on how all the variables and how you have been trained, how you have unconsciously been training your gut, unintentionally been training your gut, everything we know about you. And that's, it's like hard to talk about this because it's so different for each person. So I'm always constantly saying, like, it depends. Right, but it truly does. But I find that a lot of times people can get more curious and they can get more, not more intuitive, but more kind of like intentional about this when they start to understand those whys behind things of, like, how does my body tolerate complex carbs versus simple carbs? At what point, if I'm feeling this way, is it because I need more electrolytes? Is it because I need more fluid? Is it because I'm just tired of eating all the sweet stuff and my body just wants salty chips right now, or pretzels or something like that? So without getting into that, because I can't give all the scenarios, I think what becomes really key for people is having the options available just in case, right? Like the contingency plans of, like, all right, well, I know that, yes, I need carbohydrates, but what if I actually start to get like hungry and like all I want is like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or like a bite of something savory? Or what if I just want, like chips or pretzels or Pringles or something just to kind of break up that monotony of the sweet, sweet, sweet? And that's not necessarily going to contribute a lot to my carb goal, but it's going to give this palate cleanser effect to allow me to get back on track with some more carbohydrates. Sour stuff is really, really helpful. If you're cramping or if you just want something different, it can actually like rewire and break the circuit of the nerves that cause cramps. It's called an oropharyngeal reflux, where if you're having a cramp, if anything that makes you pucker, this is why pickle juice is helpful, mustard packets, lemons, like Sour Patch Kids, the most sour thing you can get, little sour warheads, those can be enough to short circuit, like it makes you pucker. That pucker effect is the oropharyngeal reflux, and it can be enough to short circuit a cramp and allow you to get moving again. So in when I'm setting my athletes up with this, I'm just like, let's throw all the options at you so you've got all the contingency plans so you're not like stopping at an aid station being like, the only thing I want right now, I have no idea why, but the only thing I want right now is this thing, but it's not here.
Yeah. and I like that's the most important thing at the end. Like, you need to keep eating. Like, I think that's the worst place you can get to, is that you get nauseous and then you don't eat for several hours or for an hour, and then you get really behind. So I want to go back to talking about hydration here in a moment. But before we do, you had already talked about, as we go up in elevation, our kind of VO2 max is lowered a bit. And so we're burning more carbohydrate relative, like even at rest, right? I mean, even just walking around or sitting. So with Breck Epic, with Leadville, you have this interesting thing where you're starting at 9,000 feet or 10,000 feet, but over the course of a stage or the race, you go up above 12,000 feet. And so, and again, going back to our definition of like low, moderate, and high elevation, like we're getting to extreme at that point. And so even though we're not spending a lot of time up there, but like on Willer, you can spend significant time at that elevation. And it like, I remember just being out of my mind. And so like, what tips do you have, like when you're up there, like just to like any quick things you can do just to like keep your wits about you before you start descending again?
Yeah. One of the things you kind of mentioned right there before you got to that question was just making sure that you're not getting behind is really, really key. Because if you get behind, right, like if you're not fueling enough on that climb to get up there, and then suddenly you're hitting a deficit, and then you add on the layer of I'm at extreme altitude right now, my body doesn't want anything, and I have to play catch up at this point, like that is the worst time to have to play catch up. So you want to set yourself up with a backup, with not even like a buffer, more so, right? Like make sure that you're hitting your calorie and your carbohydrate goals, your hydration goals, your electrolyte goals leading into that. So you're coming in with a really solid platform. And then you might have that hour for, say that you're up there at that highest point where you're a little bit on your low end. So with my athletes, I'm always like, okay, this is your bare minimum baseline for fluid, for electrolytes, for carbohydrates per hour. And then there's going to be, and this applies to all long efforts, like the Breck Epic, like Leadville, right? Like you're not necessarily aiming for the same carb goal every single hour because there's so much variability here, but you have to have a bare minimum baseline. And then you kind of have your mid-range, like this is my happy place. And then you have your like, oh, like this is an easier part of the effort, or I've got like some rolling hills and I can fuel more. I'm going to not catch back up, but like come back up to my high end, so that then that will create a buffer for when I have an hour where I'm at my low end, for example.
Yeah. I think you and I have talked about this before, where it's like I'll tell athletes, you should be doing something every 15 minutes. And so it's like drink on 15, eat and drink on 30 and so on. But it's like in a mountain bike race, you might be coming up, you're ascending, and all of a sudden you realize like, oh, I'm going to be descending for the next 20 minutes and I'm not going to be able to eat. And so you almost have to like get ahead of it and like, and I like, for me, it's like a lot of times I might feel a little bit full, or it's like, but it's okay, because I know that it's going to average or whatever. It's going to work itself out over the next like 30 minutes.
Exactly.
Because you're not exerting yourself. So with hydration, you talked about people like going nuts on the water. when they get to altitude, because like one, you do lose more fluids just through skin and breathing and everything else. But you all, like, part of the acclimatization process is that your body starts to like get rid of excess fluid as your plasma volume starts to like decrease and stuff like that, right? And so you mentioned electrolytes and not just drinking a bunch of plain water. But I think on the other extreme of that, like I've been talking to lots of athletes about this recently, is just like sodium, electrolytes, and like everybody thinks they need this supplement and stuff like that. And so like, where's the happy medium there?
Yeah. More is not always better, right? It's the same thing with water, right? Like, oh, well, if water's good for me, then I need to be drinking a gallon per day. And like, well, no, because you're 5'5" and your body size does not require that, right? So there's that with more is not always better when it comes to water, but there's also the, hey, unless I need it, I don't need to be loading up on all this sodium and all these other electrolytes. So this is where each individual situation comes into play, right? Like, what is your body size? What is your sweat rate? This is where sodium loss sweat tests can become beneficial. And I don't think everyone needs to be doing a sodium loss sweat test, but if you have a history of cramping or hyponatremia or having a really hard time hitting your sodium goals, your food goals, if you are just a really heavy sweater and you just can't figure out like how much you need, like there's the range in terms of how much sodium a person loses is quite significant. It can go from, like some people are needing 250 to 500 milligrams per hour. Other people need 1,000 milligrams per hour. And so if you don't know where you land on that based on the feedback and everything that you're doing, then that can be a really important piece of information that can help you then figure out, what do I actually need to be consuming per day?
And so talking about like on the bike now, this is something I've always struggled with. So let's say you do a sweat test, not even like just remove the sodium from it, and it's determined that you're losing a liter per hour or a liter and a half per hour. I've had athletes that think, oh, so I need to drink that much every hour. And it's like going back to like the logistics of it. And it's like, how would you even carry that much water?
Yeah.
And so like, do you have recommendations as far as like, what is the bare minimum for fluid replacement if you are a very heavy sweater?
Yeah, we're looking at typically like 75 to 90% of what your losses are per hour is what you want to replace.
Okay.
Yep. So that can be enough, plus electrolytes, that could be enough to make sure that you're not getting into so much of a deficit that it does start to dehydrate you or cause, negatively impact your performance. And then we'd be looking at sodium on top of that. Like we can have plenty of conversations with people and kind of figure out without a sodium loss sweat test where they might land on that spectrum of the like high end needs or the mid range or the low end needs of sodium. I never want anyone to be taking in more than, just to give some context here, like 700, 800 milligrams per hour of sodium unless they've done a sodium loss sweat test to confirm that they actually need that. But for an average, most people are going to be safe and okay with 400 to 600 milligrams of sodium per hour.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so this is just to keep talking about sodium here. Like this is something that's super interesting to me. And I've like, again, just like been following it for a while. And I go back and forth, and it sounds like you said there's some more recent research that maybe has come out that I'm not aware of yet, but it's like I've kind of like landed like, oh, most people probably don't need to supplement as long as they're eating a salty enough diet. And even if you do, it's pretty innocuous as long as you don't have hypertension. So like if people are taking salt tabs and stuff like that, but you had mentioned like not everybody needs to be drinking Element. And so like, what are the risk of overdoing the electrolytes?
The risk of overdoing the electrolytes is really coming from the fact that you would be getting too much sodium in. If you're getting a lot of sodium in your diet, and if you don't have that much sweat loss, right? Like you're not exercising enough to be hours and hours and hours in which you're losing sodium, then you're getting into high sodium, increasing blood pressure, increasing risk for cardiovascular issues, heart disease issues, like from high blood pressure, really elevated high blood pressure. So one of the things that I sometimes ask people is like, do you crave that Element? Do you crave that high salt stuff, right? Because there's some people that are like, oh, like I just love the taste of that. That brings me so much, like I crave that. That brings me so much satisfaction. Then I talk to them more and I'm like, oh yeah, you're the one that also has like, you know, you wipe your face after a workout and it's like got like salt crystals on it, right? Or you're like constantly just having the salt stains on your helmet straps and that kind of stuff. And you probably need that. And there's other people that are like, that's disgusting. I don't want that at all. I'm like, well, you're probably on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of your sodium losses. So we can get some clarity without doing some sodium loss sweat tests of where people land. But again, like the sodium loss sweat test can be really beneficial there. And it doesn't have to be, you know, Scratch Labs headquarters has them, Precision Fuel and Hydration has testing centers. The Levelin tests, they can be super helpful. The new H-drop devices can be helpful to help people recognize like trends of where they might land, right? To pay attention to it over multiple efforts, just like with the fluid loss sweat testing, where you're not going to lose the same 1 liter of fluid every single effort because one of them is going to be 80 degrees and one of them is going to be 60 degrees, right?
Yeah.
So again, like the more information you can get, the better. This is conversations that I'm always having with my athletes, so like figuring out like how they're feeling when they go out there, what their cravings are, like all the body feedback that they're getting to help us make a more informed decision about where they might land.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not a one size fits all thing. Yes. And I think that's where we kind of get into trouble because podcasts come out or blogs come out talking about the new thing. And then everybody goes and does it, even though it might not be right for them or what they're training for. So kind of continuing on the hydration stuff, we're like shifting away from altitude. It's also very hot right now. And so so you might get like the double whammy of not only high altitude, but also heat. And so I feel like there's a lot of overlap between kind of what happens with high temperatures and elevation, but like, what are the differences? What is going on with our body when we're training at like 80 plus degrees? Yeah.
The biggest thing here is that our core body temperature increases. And when your core body temperature increases, your blood is being shunted even more aggressively away from your GI tract to cool off your body, to cool off your skin, and to try to manage that core body temperature increasing. What happens there is that it can be even more difficult to tolerate carbohydrates and fuel. And also your appetite can be suppressed because of the heat, because it's all, Dave, like part of this is like, it's a stress. It's an additional stress on top of exercise. And the more stresses we add on, we add the stress of altitude, we add on the stress of exercise, we add on the stress of heat, the more things we have to manage, the more of this delicate line we're dealing with here. So when we have the stress of heat thrown in there, when we have then that response is core body temperature increasing, blood being shunted away from these organs, right? You really just have to focus on primarily making sure that you're keeping up on your carbohydrate intake. Those people that can tolerate maybe 60 grams of carbohydrates in one bolus may not be able to do that when it's 85, 90 degrees, because they just have to be more gentle on their gut and give it a slower drip of that fuel. The other thing, I just lost my train of thought there. What I don't want people to forget about also is that like the most perfect fueling plan can go awry if you're not trying to get your core body temperature down. So the ice socks, right? The bandanas, like making sure that you've got like any kind of help, like sleeves, right? All that kind of stuff to help to cool your body can be and should be a part of your strategy as well, because that is going to allow for you to execute on your nutrition and your fueling strategy. And hydration needs absolutely go up. Fluid intake, electrolyte intake.
Yeah. And so I think that's something that I like, since high carb has like come into fashion over the last several years, it's like, I feel like Alan Lim used to be like, oh, food in the pocket, hydration in the bottle. And he was like against combining those things, but then like now we're like high carb everything. And so how important does it become both at elevation and with high temperatures, like to be able to separate those things so that if you need more hydration, you can just drink hydration without overdoing the carbs, or if you just need more fuel, you can do the carbs without overdoing hydration.
Yeah. Yeah, your ratios and your concentrations of carbohydrates might differ in your bottles, and electrolytes might differ in your bottles because, I mean, at the same time your fluid needs go up, then your electrolyte concentration will follow that, but only to a degree. And so we've got to pay attention to, okay, if we're getting our electrolytes from high carb, do we necessarily need to be adding in more carbohydrates also? Or are we adding that in elsewhere? It's across the board. I have some athletes that are like, I just was talking to 2 different Breck Epic athletes this week. And one of them was like, I found out that like, I really don't like to chew stuff and I want all my stuff in the bottles. And then other people are like, when it gets hotter, like I don't want more concentrated bottles. I want to chew more stuff. So it really just depends on the person. But yeah, pay attention to the fact that, I mean, for some of these high carb drinks also, like they're not going to give you all the electrolytes that you need, especially in the heat and especially when your needs increase. So you have to have, maybe you're adding a little bit more high carb to get, 10 extra grams of carbohydrates, but you have to get an extra sodium as well. And that's going to come with just a pure sodium so that you're not adding a higher carbohydrate concentration from that source as well. Right. So the electrolyte boosters, that kind of thing will become important in that situation.
Yeah. And I think I just saw that like the feed started selling one. I think I bought like sodium citrate off Amazon before, and I just add a little bit so I can like boost the sodium. So like there are simple and cheap options out there, right?
Yeah, totally. Like the unflavored, Tailwind has just an unflavored. Element does too. I think they have just it's like, okay, if we need an extra 250 milligrams of sodium, put in a quarter of that. I mean, then you're sitting and you're measuring out things and figuring out that whole scene. But there's multiple ways to do it.
Okay.
Yep.
And so what are some of the biggest mistakes you see as people go up and start racing at altitude, especially people that live out of state and have never, won't have an opportunity to experience it before they get there? And I think that's pretty common for something like Leadville. And I mean, I would say Breck Epic too. You get people from all over the world.
Oh, for sure.
It's their first time at 8,000 feet.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest mistakes that I see people making is like not just under fueling on the bike, but when they're doing something like the Breck Epic, for example, or like at Leadville for 3 days leading up to the race and then they're racing, is they're just, they're doing all these things and they're not really paying attention to fueling as a part of their job for the day. Yeah. Right? As like, this really needs to be intentional because I'm dealing with a suppressed appetite and at the same time elevated needs. And it's really easy to get behind when you've got that combination of things happening, when you're not at your home, when you can, be walking around town and hanging out and distracted by a million things. And then it's suddenly been 4 hours since you've last eaten. And then your appetite is suppressed. So you don't want to sit down for a big meal. So you eat something small. And then you're just kind of perpetuating this problem of not getting in enough, not having enough eating opportunities throughout the day. So a lot of times what I really want to like drive home for people is like, make sure you go into this and you have your defined baseline for hourly fueling on the bike, for your day-to-day baseline of when you need to be eating, how frequently you need to be eating, kind of what your current baseline is. Know that you may lose your desire for some of that, but you actually need to have at least that as your minimum plus a little bit more. And pay attention to it. Set a timer for yourself, right? Make sure that you're not going more than 3 hours without eating something. You're probably it's going to be more likely that you're going to want smaller, more frequent meals rather than getting stuck in this place where you're going out to lunch and you're going out to more meals and you're getting really big meals, but then you're not eating in between.
Yeah.
So you really have to kind of plan ahead here and set yourself up for the fact that you're not at home and you're having all these kind of external variables thrown in that make it fairly easy to underfuel.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, I don't know that Breck is as bad at this, but it can be really easy to get caught out. Same thing with Unbound or something with the expo.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's there's so many people there and it's super hot and at high altitude, you may not notice it necessarily.
Yeah.
But so you're walking around in the sun, you're on your feet all day and it can be really easy to get behind.
It's exactly. Yep. That's one of the things that when I'm working the expo at Leadville with Scratch Labs, I've done that in the past years. I'm standing at the back of the room for the Breck Epic Riders meeting and I'm watching all these people walk around and there's some of them that might have like some snacks in their hand, or they might have a bottle. They're consuming electrolytes and fluid and that kind of stuff. But most of the people are not doing that. And like, you're about to sit down for a riders meeting for the next 45 to 90 minutes.
Well, yeah. I mean, let's talk about Mike. It's like 90 minutes is being generous.
But that's your but you should basically treat that like you're going to the movies, right? Bring a big vessel of hydration, bring a bunch of snacks because you're there. And if you want to go get your podium picture because you have a podium picture, like, yeah, it is going to take like a solid hour plus to do that. And this is a perfect opportunity to be sitting there and refueling and recovering from the effort you just did and carb loading for the effort you have tomorrow.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think stage races are unique in that aspect, where it's like, it's funny. The first year I did Breck Epic, I was so excited because I was like, oh, it's just going to be like bike camp, and every night I'm just going to watch Netflix. But it's like, you finish, your bike's broken, so you have to fix whatever's broken that day. You have to wash it. You have to go to the meeting, and then you have to eat. And so like, how important does that post-stage fueling become over 6 days?
Oh my God. It's like one of the most important things. So finish your ride for the day. Within 45 minutes, get in carbohydrates, mostly carbs, a little bit of protein, like at a bare minimum, absolute bare minimum, 40 grams of carbohydrates, 10 grams of protein. But honestly, like whatever you want, get it in. If you struggle with a lack of appetite, anything is better than nothing, because that 45 minutes is really key. And then from there, I mean, research even shows that the longer you wait, and by the time you get to 2 hours post-workout, your opportunity to replenish glycogen stores has decreased by 50%. Yeah. So you really have to optimize that opportunity to recover from that effort you just did and replenish glycogen stores for the next day within the next 2 hours, absolutely, but also for the next 4 hours. We have hourly carbohydrate goals for all of our athletes, where this is what you're doing hour 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then you can be a little bit more lenient after that and kind of go more by what you want and what you desire. But that becomes like a non-negotiable right off the bat. So get in what you can right away. For the Breck Epic, I know that they're going to have a recovery station at the base at Beaver Run with all sorts of food, all sorts of like Scratch is their sponsor, Scratch recovery mix. So that's super easy. No matter where you're staying, come back there, have that, get your bike washed, whatever it is. And then you've done that. You give yourself a little bit of wiggle room, right? Go in the shower, like get changed, and then have something else. And then have a meal, and then have something else. And you're just setting yourself up for eating something every hour for the first 4 hours, and then every 2 to 2.5, 3 hours for the rest of the evening.
Yeah, so I'm curious what that looks like for the athletes you're working with. So I think about it, and it's like you're exhausted. You have all this stuff to do, and if you didn't have the foresight to like meal prep or something like that, like what kind of things are you having them eat every hour? Like, does it matter at that point, or is it just like whatever you can get?
Well, the first rule of thumb is like, if you don't feel like anything is going to be better than nothing, especially if it's going to be high carb. First hour, most of them, just to keep it simple and to take that logistic off their plate, I'm sending them to the Scratch Labs recovery station. They're calling it like the final aid station. It's at Beaver Run right there. Okay, go there, have them mix you up a recovery shake and grab some like salted potatoes or grab like whatever you want, right? And then go and shower, get changed. And then the next thing, like there's two people, there's one person that's super hungry and they're going to go have a meal, but I'm going to tell them, have a meal, have some protein, have some fat, have some plants, and add 2 servings of carbohydrates instead of 1 to it. But then there's the other person that's like, I don't have an appetite yet. And then I'm like, okay, well then go and repeat what you just did for that first one and do it again until you get your appetite back, and then go and have your meal. And have just like whatever sounds good to you. If you're making your own thing because you're camping or because you're in a hotel, like a really easy thing is just like some sort of rice, some sort of protein, a little bit of plants, and call it good. Yeah. If they're going out to eat, like have something that's high carbohydrate with, some protein, because you're hungry too. You need to have some hunger prevention to get you through the night and to get you through the fact that for the last 4 or 5, 6 hours, you were consuming primarily carbohydrates. So you're behind in that. But, carbohydrates are going to displace some fat and protein and some fiber and plants for those days. And that's okay. And then from there, adding in like a post-dinner snack, similar to, again, the recovery, right? Mostly carbohydrates and a little bit of protein. At that point, I'm like, just eat what your body wants. If it's like a smaller version of dinner, like in a rice and egg bowl, or if it's a bowl of cereal, cool. If you're like, yeah, I could go ahead of ice cream cone right now, then go and do that. But bowls of cereal are great.
Yeah. I love that. So I think something like, I think we've discussed this before too. Like you can get in the weeds where it's like you get analysis paralysis, where it's like you're looking at the fridge and it's like, oh, I've got to have this many grams of protein and I have to have this many grams of carbs. And I think you've said it before, like stop worrying about like the amount of protein. Just have, like you just said it 3 times, I think. And it's like, have some protein. Like don't stress about it being 20 grams or 30 grams or like just eat some protein.
Yep, exactly.
And so this, like, I feel like this might be a little bit outdated. And so I'm just like curious if it still applies. Like we used to carb load. So like the 3 or 4 days leading up to a big event. And I mean, like I still tell my athletes to do it, but not necessarily like a carb load. It's more just like intentionally eat more carbs in those 3 or 4 days leading up to it, and intentionally maybe consume some more salt, like salt your food a little bit more to kind of like preload hydration and sodium. Is that something that like still applies, or is that outdated advice at this point?
No, so for the carb load, yeah, for sure. It can be beneficial. We're typically looking at, let's say you have a Saturday event, then we're looking at we can look at Thursday as, for the days leading up to that, I want to make sure that people are not under fueling, right? Like 4 or 5 plus days, like make sure that you're not going long periods of time without eating. You're eating balanced meals, balanced snacks, you're staying hydrated. You're really supporting that day to day, no matter what you're doing, baseline foundation. And then starting Thursday, you're going to add an extra serving or half a serving extra carbohydrates to every single meal and snack that you're consuming throughout the day. From there, on Friday, that's when we can get into, okay, let's add overall, if you want to be tracking this, 8 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight additional carbohydrate. The real carb load there. Sometimes we'll have people do it on Thursday and Friday, depending on the situation, depending on the logistics of what their day looks like, their travel, like what they've done in the past that's worked or not worked, all those kind of things, what their goals are for the event, right? There's so much, but Friday is kind of across the board. We can absolutely do a carb load for anyone. And we can look at not just that kind of like bigger picture, add an additional half to 1 serving of carbohydrates to every single meal and snack, but we can look at number specifics of let's make sure that you're hitting this. And we've plugged it into, like Claude and been like, hey, this is the person, this is like what their daily baseline is. Can you give us some ideas of like what this would look like if they were aiming for 600 to 675 grams of carbs per day? What would they add to this? And then we have to consider the factors of, all right, well, we want to also reduce some fiber. We're going to naturally reduce some fiber by switching from whole grains to white grains, from switching from, like complex carbohydrates to simple carbs, because that's a great thing to be doing. But we're also going to displace a little bit of fat and protein as well, because we're just going to increase the volume of food with carbohydrates.
And so as people do this, like, and again, like I think cyclists were like probably the worst at it, right? Like we're always worried about gaining weight. And so as you carb load, like it's pretty common to like gain like 2 to 4 pounds, right? Because you're with each gram of carbohydrate, there's like a gram of water or something along those lines. And so like, do you typically see that like as people start to carb load that they put on a little bit of weight? And then how do you address that if like when they start freaking out, they're like, oh God, I'm 5 pounds heavier than I was a few days ago?
I see that if they do the carb load too quickly, typically, like if they wait until Friday afternoon or Friday night to do all of their carb load, then it's more likely that they're going to hold on to that weight because their body's not going to have time to digest through it all and to utilize it all and to store it all and to move it to where it needs to go. Because carbohydrate does make you retain water out of any macronutrient. But if you kind of slow drip your carb load into the 2 days leading up and not just dinner on Friday night, your body will respond a lot better to it, and you'll see less of that water retention, less of that bloating that some people experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how about for like the preloading hydration, either morning of or the days leading up to it? Like, do you advise that?
Yeah. I keep saying this. I'm like, it depends on the person. But as a baseline, you can typically add like 1 to 2 servings of 500 to 700 milligrams of sodium on the day, the 1 to 2 days before, and then you can sip on electrolytes instead of plain fluid on race morning.
Yeah.
Just to thirst instead of plain water, and that's fine. There's no need to do like a ton extra and overhydrate yourself, but those 1 to 2 additional servings can be beneficial.
Yeah. Okay. So is there anything that I've missed? Like we've talked about a lot. So is there anything that you feel like definitely needs to be mentioned for somebody that's either racing in extreme heat or racing at high altitudes?
Ferritin, iron status.
Yes, I would. Super interested in hearing about this.
That's something that is really valuable to look at, because sometimes if that's not where you want it to be, you're just working an uphill battle that you cannot fix in the moment. So for people that are looking to Leadville, Breck Epic now, I mean, we want to be looking at this at least 3 months ahead of time, because if we're going to make any kind of supplemental changes, dietary changes to support a low ferritin, we have to have that much time really to start to see some improvements. But ideally, we're looking at ferritin levels being at least 50 for most people across the board or higher. Yeah. And the really interesting thing about that is when you look at the reference range of like, those lines when you get lab work and it's like, it's red or it's green or it's within range or it's not within range, that range for ferritin can be, I want to say it starts like absurdly low. It's like 12 or something like that, or 18. And I've had this experience myself with a doctor up here who's in Breckenridge at high altitude, where my ferritin was 18. And they're like, yeah, you're good to go. You're within the reference range. And that doesn't apply to our situation to endurance athletes. So we have to look at it from that perspective of like, okay, what are you doing? What are your goals here? Where are you racing? All these things that put us as endurance athletes outside of the reference ranges, especially for ferritin.
Yeah. And that's super interesting. And I know like we put a lot of faith in doctors and we should, like they've gone to school a long time and stuff, but a lot of times they're working with the general population and we are not the general population. And so like those normal ranges a lot of times don't apply to us. So, so aside from, and I guess will you just like speak a little bit about what ferritin is, but after that, I'm curious, like what are some of the other blood markers that endurance athletes might want to look at?
Yeah. Ferritin is your storage form of iron. So it's kind of more indicative of actually what is going on, like across the board. You can have your circulating iron, but your circulating iron could be good at the same time that your ferritin, your storage form of iron, is being pulled from to support your circulating iron. So we want to make sure the ferritin is good along with the other biomarkers that are looking at iron. So ferritin, key. Vitamin D is key. Your immunity can also be suppressed at altitude. So conveniently, vitamin C helps iron absorb. So you can some people will get strategic about slightly increasing their vitamin C to support iron, but also to support immunity. Like just be mindful of that, especially for my people that are traveling to races like Leadville and Breck Epic. You've got all this stress that's being put on your body by being on an airplane. I personally, if I'm going to go and travel for a race or to go ride my bike somewhere, I'm just going to wear a mask because I don't want to get any sickness. Well,
especially you've invested all this time and money into doing this race. Exactly. The last thing you want is to get sick on the trip over.
Exactly. So, minimize the stress load, minimize your exposure opportunities, right? That's really the main thing that we're looking at for blood biomarkers. Hemoglobin is going to be slightly elevated for people that live at altitude because our bodies are working harder to support our oxygen carrying capacity of our red blood cells, red blood cell density, that kind of thing. That can change. And our body, when you come up to altitude and you're experiencing that, your body is going to be kicking into high drive to try to concentrate your blood and to allow more red blood cells to carry more oxygen. And it's doing that actively as soon as you get to altitude. So that's where the hydration comes into play. That's where you might have more cravings for like red meat, for example, high iron foods, and that's okay. That's totally fair. Some people are getting strategic. Like my athletes that are going to training camp up at high altitude, they're getting really strategic about their iron intake leading up to that, making sure that their iron levels are adequate, vitamin C levels are adequate, everything across the board is adequate to just support that adaptation that their body's going to start to kind of kick into high drive when they get that exposure to altitude.
Yeah, and I feel like that's such a common theme that we've talked about before, where we're doing all these things to our body hoping for positive adaptation, but if we're not supporting it with the resources it needs, it's just kind of like hitting our heads against the wall. So
that's what I always say about recovery is like, you just, for recovery, if you go and do a workout, especially if it's over 90 minutes or intensity 60 minutes or let alone, 3, 4, 5+ hours, and you're not giving your body what it needs to recover from that effort and say, hey, that was hard, let's make that a little bit easier next time. Like our body doesn't just pull internal resources to do that. That's up to us to give it the carbohydrates and the nutrition and the rest and recovery opportunity it needs to get stronger and faster and make it a little bit easier next time. Like that's all 100% on us.
Yeah.
And if we're missing out on that, we're missing out on this massive opportunity.
Yeah. And so I'll end with this. We kind of started talking about this before we were recording, but we talked about just like the difference between like short workouts or short races and then longer events. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, like going back to Leadville and using that specifically, like most people are hoping to do it in under 12 hours. And some are trying to do, some are trying to do sub-9s, but how do things change? So again, we're at high altitude, so we're already using more carbohydrate. What happens after 4, 5, 6 hours? Like how do our energy needs change? And what is the mechanism behind that?
It's all stress load related, right? Like how your body responds to 3 hours is not necessarily going to be the same as how your body responds to 4, 5, and 6 hours is not necessarily going to be the same how it responds to 7, 8, and 9 hours, and so on and so on. So for some people, they can tolerate the same fuel sources for 9 hours, for 12 hours. And for other people, they can't. And that's just it's to some degree gut training, right? But to some degree, it's just the fact that, hey, I'm out here for 6+ hours and I am starting to get a little bit hungry instead of just needing carbohydrates. And I need a little bit more solid food. And I need like a half of a peanut butter and jelly, or I need like, I don't know, some Hawaiian roll with a little bit of ham on it or something like that, right? Because we need that variety when we're out there for longer periods of time. That's where gut rot and flavor fatigue becomes more likely. And what I say across the board is like what works for you for a 3-hour effort is not necessarily going to work for you for a 6-hour effort, for a 9-hour effort, for a 12-hour effort. It's not to say that it's not going to, but let's make sure that it's going to,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just you get more variables that are thrown in. You get more stress. Your body responds differently. The more the stress goes on, you get the flavor fatigue opportunities. You get the gut rot opportunities. I don't know how else to explain it other than that. It's just your body is responding to more and more stress. And the more stress that's laid on to you, it just opens up more opportunity for your body to respond in so many different ways.
Well, and I have to imagine, like part of it as we go on, even we're doing our best to replenish fluids, but we're not replenishing all of them.
Yeah.
And so you're getting more and more dehydrated. Your muscles are starting to fatigue and starting to recruit more energy hungry muscles. And so like that's going up a little bit, like the flavor, like just all these things. It's just like a cascade of things happening over the course of the day. So
exactly. The way that I think about it is there's this threshold that's constantly chasing you, right? Like you have to stay above the threshold of being underfueled, underhydrated. And if it's chasing you for 3 hours, that's pretty easy to do. If it's chasing you for 6 or 9 or 12 hours, it gets more and more difficult to do. So this is where consistency becomes so, so important, where it's like, right, if I'm doing a 3-hour, 4-hour effort and I miss, an hour, hour and a half of fueling, okay, I can probably get to the end of this. But if I'm doing a 6-hour effort and I'm missing half of the hours of fueling for that, and so on, then that threshold is getting closer and closer to catching up to me. and making me have a really hard time here, whether it's bonking or struggling or getting cramps or whatever that might be.
Yeah. And I'll also add, like, over those long days, whether we're talking about Leadville or Unbound or something, like, it's such a long day, and like there's going to be dark moments, and you'll probably experience multiple flavors of that, right? Like, where it's like there'll be times where you're like, I can't go on, but it's like if you just stop, slow down a little bit, eat, drink, like a lot of times you can pull yourself out of it, but like it's gonna happen, and there's lots of opportunities for it to happen over 9 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just more opportunities for that kind of stuff to happen. And a lot of people will ask me, like, okay, let's say I get into the situation where I'm bonking, or I just like, I have to pull myself out of a hole. What's the best thing I can do to do that? I'm like, typically you just have to slow down. You have to decrease the intensity to allow yourself to catch up.
Yeah. And I think I've fallen victim to this multiple times, where it's like when you're in that race mindset, you don't want to stop. But I think like it's a net positive. If you would just slow down a little bit and focus on fueling and hydrating, you'll probably end up going faster in the long run than if you just keep like this slow downward spiral.
That's what I say to a lot of people. I'm like, would you rather spend 30 seconds now fueling, right? Hydrating, doing what you need to do to slow down or take your hands off the handlebars, or would you rather spend 30 minutes or who knows how long later pulling yourself out of a bonk?
Yeah.
By doing this now and taking the time now, you're saving yourself later. You're creating more time for yourself later.
Yeah. It's so hard to remember in the moment, but
it is. It's so hard.
It's so important. So I lied. This is what we'll end with. What, if anything, are some of the things you've seen people do that, again, they're new to altitude, this is the first time coming? Like, what are some of the like quick fixes they've tried to do that like don't work from your view, if you've seen anything?
I mean, just focusing on chugging water, honestly, is what I see all the time, instead of focusing on the big picture of like hydration balance and electrolytes and that, first of all. And then, like we were just talking about, like getting caught up in it all and forgetting to fuel. And then suddenly race starts tomorrow morning and I'm like trying to play catch up, and holy cow, I'm already in a deficit. The best thing you can do for these kind of events is just make sure that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday before Saturday, right, is solid, because then you're not dealing with going in already behind.
Yeah. And I think I'll add to that, just because it like reminded me as you're talking about it. Like with these big events, like Leadville is a marquee event. There's a couple thousand people. Time flies. Those first 3 hours can fly by, and it can be really easy to forget to eat. And the next thing you know, you haven't eaten anything or drank anything in a couple hours. And so I think that's the other, like, don't get again, getting caught up. Like, remember your plan, stick to your plan. Don't fall victim to the pomp and circumstance. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's a great point. Another thing too is that, kind of like you mentioned, like it's hot out, you're in the sun, you're at altitude, you're closer to the sun. Keep yourself protected from the sun, because sometimes people that come from these really hot places, it doesn't feel as hot up here, but it is more extreme. It's drier. It's more sun exposure. That can wreck people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Where can people find you?
Instagram, primarily, Uri Carlson Nutrition. Just type in Uri and you'll probably find me. And people can send me messages. They can send me voice memos on Instagram. I do free discovery calls. That's for anyone that's curious about what it's like to work with me, to make sure that the way that we work is a good fit for you, and to make sure, first of all, that I'm confident I can help you. So for anyone that's curious about that, that's why I do those. And there's something that I offer for free.
Awesome. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and I hope we can do it again.